Hey guys, tonight we're stepping into the humid, hairspray-soaked backstage of the 1980s arena tour, where spandex-clad dancers stretched under bare bulbs, while a drum machine thumped through cinder block. This is the real story of the anonymous bodies behind Madonna, Michael, Janet, Prince, and Tina. Sequins, sweat, and Greyhound buses included. Before you get comfortable, take a second to like and subscribe, but only if you actually enjoy this. It genuinely helps more of these long, quiet histories find the people who need them, and tapping that little bell means the next one will drift into your feed the same way a bus drifts into a sleeping city at 4 in the morning. Leave a comment telling me where you're listening from and what time it is. I love reading them. Now, dim those lights, switch on a fan, and pull your blanket up. Get comfortable. Turn your screen face down so the glow of it doesn't keep you tethered to the century you're actually in. Let your shoulders drop away from your ears. Unclench your jaw, you stubborn thing. Let your hands fall open at your sides. Breathe in slowly through your nose. Hold for a gentle count of 4 and release through the mouth. There is nothing to follow, nothing to remember, no quiz at the end, and no choreography, which, given the topic, feels only fair. Let's pause for a second. Have you ever wondered what it really felt like to be one of those bodies in the background? The ones whose faces flickered behind Madonna for 3 seconds on MTV before the camera cut back to her. Have you ever wondered how you even got such a job in the first place? How a kid from Sacramento or Queens or Detroit ended up on a stage in Tokyo wearing a cone bra and counting 8? How much did a backup dancer actually earn per week on a Madonna tour in 1985? Somewhere between $750 and $1,500, minus commissions, minus taxes in 6 different states. How did they get cast standing in lines of 300 hopefuls at Debbie Reynolds Studios on Lankershim or Broadway Dance Center in Manhattan with a number safety pinned to their leotard? Who sewed their costumes late at night? Marlene Stewart with her mouth full of pins, Michael Bush and Dennis Tompkins building those sergeant jackets for Bad by Hand? What did they eat between Cincinnati and Pittsburgh, rolling through the dark at 2 in the morning in a bunk stacked 3 high? What did their feet actually look like after 90 shows, taped and blistered and somehow still jumping? How did they call their mothers before cell phones, feeding quarters into a payphone in a Holiday Inn lobby in Tulsa? What happened when someone blew out a knee in Osaka and a plane ticket home arrived the next morning? Did Michael Jackson actually know their names or just call everyone Love? Did anyone ever recognize them in the frozen food aisle at the Ralph's in Encino? And what did it really feel like to stand in the wings at Wembley, counting 8 under your breath, knowing 90,000 people were about to see you and not see you at all? Congratulations, you've just woken up in 1984. It's a rainy Tuesday morning in February, and you're standing on a sidewalk on Lankershim Boulevard in North Hollywood, wearing leg warmers pulled up over your calves, a cut-off sweatshirt slipping down one shoulder, and clutching a manila envelope with your headshot and resume folded inside. The line of hopefuls stretches around the block, and the girl in front of you is doing slow plies against a parking meter to stay warm. The air smells of wet asphalt and eucalyptus, and somehow hairspray. A casting assistant with a clipboard and a Walkman around her neck is counting down the line, calling numbers. For the next 2 hours, you are a backup dancer on the edge of a career you cannot yet imagine. Good luck. The line moves slowly, because everything in this world moves slowly until it moves all at once. You shuffle forward a few inches every 10 minutes or so, and you try to pretend you are not studying the competition, even though you are studying the competition. The girl in front of you with the parking meter plies has the kind of turnout that only comes from 15 years of ballet, and the boy behind you has a high top fade so architectural it could file taxes on its own. Somewhere further up the line, someone is drilling a pirouette on the wet sidewalk, and you watch her spot the traffic light on Lankershim and come out of it with her arms still sharp, and you think, quietly, oh no. Let me explain the geography you have stumbled into, because it matters. By 1984, Los Angeles has become the absolute center of commercial dance in the United States. And it is not because of Broadway, and it is not because of the movies. Not really. It is because of television variety shows, and it is because of music videos, and it is because of MTV. Only 3 years old at this point, has created something nobody has ever seen before, which is a permanent 24-hour demand for bodies that can dance on camera. Which is why you are standing in this particular line, outside this particular building. Debbie Reynolds opened her dance studio right here on Lankershim Boulevard in 1979. And in 5 short years, it has become a kind of cattle yard of hope, a place where any working choreographer in town can rent a floor and throw out an open call and have 300 dancers show up inside of an hour. Up the boulevard is Joe Tremaine's dance center, which is where half of the people in this line take class in the evenings, learning the sharp, percussive jazz style that Tremaine essentially invented for television. Down the road is the Roland Dupree Dance Academy, and a few years from now, in 1988, Edge Performing Arts Center will open in a building off Hollywood Boulevard and become the other gravitational pole of the LA dance world. On the other coast, in a loft above 57th and Broadway, a man named Richard Elner has just opened Broadway Dance Center this very year, in 1984, and it will become the East Coast mirror of everything happening here. There is steps on Broadway for the Bunheads and Luigi's Jazz Center for anyone who wants to study with the man himself, Eugene Louis Facuito, who rebuilt his own body after a car accident and turned his rehab exercises into an entire technique. But if you want to be cast on a pop tour in 1984, if you want to end up behind Michael or Madonna or Prince, you pretty much have to pass through the orbit of Tremaine in the west and Elner in the east, and most of the people standing in this line with you right now can trace their training straight back to one of those 2 rooms. The teachers whose names will define your decade are all around you, although you do not quite know it yet. Jaime Rogers, the West Side Story veteran, is choreographing television specials. Tony Basil, who you maybe think of only as the Mickey Song Lady, is actually a dance genius who has already choreographed for David Bowie and for Talking Heads, and who will soon run the whole Glass Spider tour. Lester Wilson is shaping movement for everyone from Sammy Davis Jr. to Lola Falana. And then there is Michael Peters, who last year, in 1983, co-choreographed a little thing called Thriller with Michael Jackson himself, and also the Beat It video before it, and who is currently, as you stand shivering on this sidewalk, the most sought-after commercial choreographer on the planet. Vincent Patterson is coming up right behind him. Both of them will change your life within the next 3 years, whether or not they ever learn your name. The line moves. You shift your weight. Your manila envelope is starting to go soft in the drizzle, and you tuck it under your sweatshirt against your stomach to keep your headshot from pulping. Here is what is about to happen inside. The casting assistant with the Walkman, whose name is probably Amy or Kim or Jennifer, will wave you through a door and into a lobby, and she will hand you a square of white paper with a number printed on it in thick black marker and a safety pin, and she will tell you, politely and without smiling, to pin it to the front of your leotard. You will be number 217 or 341, or if the calls started earlier than you knew, 462, which means you are going to be in there all day. You will be herded into a studio with a wall of mirrors and a marley floor that smells faintly of rosin and foot sweat, and you will be packed in shoulder to shoulder with 60 other hopefuls, and a choreographer or a choreographer's assistant will stand at the front and teach you a combination in 20 minutes. 8 counts of something, then another 8, then another, and until you have a minute or so of material in your body that you have never seen before in your life and are now expected to perform as if you were born knowing it. Then the cuts begin. The first cut will take the room from 300 to maybe 100, and it will feel almost random, because it kind of is, because they are looking for a particular body type and a particular attitude, and the first pass is basically a visual sweep. The second cut will take you down to 40, the third to 12, the fourth, if there is a fourth, to 6. At every single stage, the assistant will stand at the front and read numbers off a list, and if your number is read, depending on the choreographer's mood, you either stay or go. There is no logic you can trust. A dancer with perfect technique from the Juilliard School can lose to a kid who learned to pop in a parking lot in East Los Angeles, because by 1984, MTV has shifted the aesthetic of what a pop dancer is supposed to look like, and the pendulum has swung hard towards street style, toward attitude, toward the kind of edge that does not come out of a ballet class. You will watch a girl who can do triple pirouettes get cut in the first round, while a boy who can barely hold a paso but moves like water through concrete gets kept, and you will have to accept this, because this is the new math. Let me tell you how some of the legends of the next decade actually got their starts. When Michael Peters was casting the Beat It video in late 1982, he famously did not fill the rival gangs with trained dancers alone. He brought in actual members of the Crips and the Bloods, real gang-affiliated guys from South Central, to dance alongside the professionals, because he wanted the friction to feel real on camera. It worked. Vincent Patterson, who was one of those professional dancers in Beat It, later graduated to choreographing Smooth Criminal for Michael Jackson and Jeffrey Daniel from the group Shalimar, the man who actually taught Michael Jackson the backslide that the world would come to call the moonwalk, became a quiet kingmaker in pop casting, consulting on auditions for years without most of the dancers he picked ever knowing his full role. Madonna's pipeline was a little different, and it is worth understanding, because in 3 years, in 1987, she will hold auditions for her Who's That Girl World Tour and bring in Adolfo Quiñones, better known to the entire free world as Shabba-Doo from the Break-In movies, to consult on her casting. 3 years after that, in the spring of 1990, she will hold the auditions that become immortal, the ones in the opening of Truth or Dare, the ones where she cast the dancers for Blonde Ambition. 2 of those dancers, Luis Camacho and Jose Gutierrez, were not scouted at a studio at all. They were scouted at the Sound Factory, a club in Manhattan, dancing on the floor in the middle of the night as members of the legendary House of Extravaganza, and they brought voguing onto the biggest pop stage in the world. All of which is to say, the path into this industry is not a straight line. It is a zigzag of timing and chance and being in the right humid room at the right humid moment. Back to your Tuesday. Let's say, because this is your fantasy and I am your friend, that you make it through all 4 cuts. It is now past 4 in the afternoon. Your feet are throbbing. Your number, 217, is peeling loose at one corner. You and 5 other dancers are standing in a hot studio, and the choreographer, whoever it is, thanks everyone by their first name. And you walk out onto Lankershim, and the sky has gone the particular washed-out lavender of a Los Angeles winter dusk, and you sit on the curb, and you wait. Now comes the worst part, which is the waiting. You go home to your apartment in Van Nuys or Studio City, and you stare at your answering machine, the kind with the tiny cassette tape and the red blinking light. You check it every 20 minutes. You stare at the phone. You rewind the tape to make sure it is working. You go to the corner store and buy a frozen pizza because you cannot cook right now, and when you come back, there are no messages, and you hate yourself for hoping. The next day, you call your agent, probably at Bobby Ball Agency, or maybe McDonald Richards in New York if you are bi-coastal, or Cunningham Escott DePan if you have lucked into the bigger agency. You ask, softly, whether they have heard anything. The assistant says no, not yet. They will call you the moment they do, and you hang up and you go to class, because what else is there to do? This waiting stretches for 2 days, or 5, or, if you are really unlucky, 10. And then your agent calls and says, "I am so sorry, sweetie. It was a no this time." And you sit on the edge of your bed and you cry for about 45 seconds, and then you wipe your face and you get up, because there is another audition on Thursday at a different studio for a different tour with a different choreographer who has a different idea of what kind of body they want. But not this time. This time, on day 3, your phone rings. You snatch it off the cradle before the second ring. Your agent is trying not to sound excited because agents are professionals. But she is not doing a very good job. She says your name, and then she says the word that every dancer in this city waits their entire young life to hear, which is yes. You booked it. Rehearsals start in 11 days in Burbank. Call time is 9 in the morning. Bring jazz shoes, black leotard, water bottle, headshot, and your body. You will sign a contract in the next 48 hours. If the tour is union, it will be through the American Guild of Variety Artists, AGVA, and the paperwork will lay out a weekly salary somewhere between $750 and $1,200, depending on your experience, with per diem of $35 to $50 a day for meals on the road, overtime scales in small print, riders about hotel sharing and ground transportation, and the usual language about costumes being the property of the production. If it is non-union, which plenty of these gigs still are in 1984, the numbers might be lower and the protections will be non-existent, and you will sign it anyway, because this is the call you have been waiting for since you were 9 years old in a strip mall studio in Sacramento, or Queens, or Detroit, watching Solid Gold on television and thinking, I could do that. I could genuinely do that if somebody would just let me. Somebody has just let you. You hang up the phone. You stand in the middle of your one-bedroom apartment in Studio City, holding the receiver in your hand, and for a long moment you do not move, because if you move, this might not be real. Then you call your mother, and then you call your best friend, and then you sit down on the floor and you cry, properly this time, the kind of crying that is not sadness but release, because the line you stood in on Lankershim in the rain was worth it after all. 11 days. You have 11 days to pack a duffel bag, break in 2 new pairs of jazz shoes, pick up your dry cleaning, sublet your apartment, say goodbye to the cat you will not see for a year, and become someone who, for the next 12 months of your life, belongs to a tour. And somewhere across town, in a soundstage in Burbank, a choreographer is taping out marks on a black floor, and they are drawing the first shape of the thing you are about to walk into. 11 days later, you are standing in front of that soundstage at 8:45 in the morning, holding a cardboard coffee cup from a place on Magnolia Boulevard, with your duffel bag at your feet and a knot in your stomach that feels somewhere between first day of high school and getting on a roller coaster. The sound stage itself is an enormous grey warehouse with a single metal door, and when you push through it, the inside opens up like a cathedral of industry. Black marley floor rolled out and taped at the seams. Fluorescent lights in long rectangles overhead. A humming at a frequency you can actually hear. A wall of mirrors against one side, propped up with plywood backings. A production table at the far end, draped in a black cloth, with legal pads and coffee carafes and a neat row of cassette tapes. A stereo rack the size of a refrigerator, with reels and levels, and little red lights blinking like a small alien spacecraft has landed. And spike tape everywhere. Strips of neon yellow and pink and orange tape laid down on the black floor in shapes you cannot yet read, because those shapes are going to be the map of your life for the next 4 to 6 weeks. If this is Madonna's Virgin Tour in 1985, you are at SIR Studios in Los Angeles, the famous rehearsal complex on North Highland that has housed every major tour of the era. But if this is Michael Jackson's Victory Tour in 1984, you have already rehearsed at Kaufman Astoria Studios in Queens, and you are now down in Alabama at Birmingham Racecourse, 3 weeks from the opening night in Kansas City on July 6th. If this is Janet Jackson's Rhythm Nation in 1990, you are about to spend 12 hours a day under the watchful eye of Anthony Thomas, the choreographer who basically invented the visual vocabulary that most of Janet's career will live inside. It does not matter which one you are doing. The room feels the same. Cold in the morning, hot by noon, smelling of coffee and rosin, and the particular chemical sweetness of a newly rolled marley floor. 9 in the morning is company call. There are 8, 10, 12 of you, depending on the tour, and you size each other up the way dancers do, which is to say, you pretend not to, and you absolutely do. You register everyone's feet, everyone's turnout, everyone's hair, everyone's shoes. You note who came from Broadway and who came from MTV and who came from a strip mall studio, just like yours in some town nobody has heard of. The rehearsal director, usually a former dancer who has aged into a kind of benevolent drill sergeant role, claps her hands, and everyone assembles in a loose circle on the floor, and the warm-up begins. Ballet bar against folding chairs, pliés, tendus, dégages, rond de jambe, to a cassette of something soft and classical, center floor combinations, stretches that feel like small negotiations between you and your hamstrings. By 9:45 you are sweating, which is good, because then you are ready to actually start learning. This is the moment everything changes. The choreographer walks in. If it is 1987, it might be Vincent Paterson arriving for the start of the Bad Tour rehearsal block, a lean man with intense eyes who will set the choreography for the next 2 years of Michael Jackson's life. If it is 1990, it might be Anthony Thomas, with his impossibly precise isolations and his habit of demonstrating a move once, fully, at full speed, as if daring you to keep up. They do not small talk. They get to work. Choreographers in this era set the steps. They build the piece. They make the big creative decisions about what the show will look like. And then, once the tour opens, they hand the finished choreography over to a dance captain, usually one of the dancers in the company, who will be the one maintaining the work on the road, calling cleaning rehearsals, fixing spacing, adjusting counts when the star is feeling off, and essentially policing the whole thing for the next year. The steps you are learning are not casual steps. If you are rehearsing for the Bad Tour, you are learning the smooth criminal lean, and in 1987, this is not the magic shoe moment yet. The shoe that will eventually anchor Michael Jackson to the stage at a 45-degree angle, United States Patent Number 5255452, is not filed until 1992. In 1987, the lean is achieved the old-fashioned way, which is to say with harness rigs and core strength and cable wires. And if you are one of the dancers doing the lean with him, you are essentially doing a full-body plank while wearing a fedora. If you are rehearsing the Thriller number, which often gets resurrected for live shows, you are learning zombie choreography with the kind of specificity that requires you to remember where every single finger lives on every single count. If you are in Blonde Ambition in 1990, you are being taught voguing, not by the choreographer on paper, but by Jose Gutierrez and Luis Camacho themselves, the two dancers scouted from the House of Stravaganza, who are now quietly teaching the most famous woman in the world and her entire creative team how to actually move their hands through the air in the way the ballroom scene has been moving their hands for a decade. And if you are learning anything with Paula Abdul in the room, whether she is dancing or choreographing, you are being fed the jazz-funk hybrid that will define her solo career the minute Forever Your Girl drops in 1988. The days are 12 hours long, 9 to 9 with a 1-hour lunch. Craft services is set up on a folding table at the edge of the studio, and it is so consistent across every tour of this era that it could be a museum exhibit. Bagels with cream cheese sliced in half. Cold cuts of turkey and ham laid out in pinwheel arrangements on plastic trays. Iceberg lettuce in a plastic bowl with shredded carrots and a single small ladle of Italian dressing. Tab in pink cans. Diet Coke in silver cans. Regular Coke for the dancers who have not yet been told to stop drinking it. A bowl of fruit that is technically there and technically gets eaten by 1 or 2 people. A jar of Skippy peanut butter. A loaf of Wonder Bread and jelly in little foil packets because somebody is always going to make a sandwich at 3 in the afternoon when the blood sugar crashes. You eat fast. You eat standing up. You eat because your body is an engine. And if you do not feed it, you will miss a count, and the choreographer will stop the music and look at you, not angrily, just tiredly. And that is worse than being yelled at, because it means you cost the room 15 minutes. So you eat your bagel in 4 bites, and you are back on the floor. Afternoons are blocking. This is where the spike tape you noticed in the morning finally makes sense. Those neon shapes on the floor are the dimensions of the actual stage, or the thrust, or the runways, or the risers marked out to the inch. You learn where you enter from. You learn where your spot is on count 5 of bar 32. You learn that if the person to your left is a quarter inch off their mark, the whole diamond formation behind them looks broken from the back of the arena. Blocking is not glamorous. Blocking is counting under your breath while a stage manager with a headset and a clipboard calls out spacing numbers, and someone else runs a yellow tape measure from tape mark to tape mark. Blocking is the invisible architecture that makes everything else work. Evenings are notes. You gather at the production table, sweating through your leotard, and the choreographer goes through every section of the day and tells you what worked and what did not. The notes are specific and surgical. Your elbow was dropped on count 6. You were late on the second 8. Your head angle was wrong in the turn. You listen. You nod. You write nothing down because real dancers remember, and anyway, writing it down would break the spell of the thing. And then, because bodies are not machines no matter how much we pretend, there is the injury culture, which is honestly its own whole subsection of this life. You tape your ankles every morning before class. You pop Advil like it is a vitamin, 4 at a time, because ibuprofen does not care about your liver, and neither do you. You fill the hotel bathtub with ice, and you sit in it for 10 minutes at a time, teeth chattering, because it is the only thing that makes your knees feel 24 instead of 44. You visit whatever dance medicine specialist the production has on retainer, maybe Dr. Richard Braver or somebody like him. And you get cortisone in your left big toe, because your left big toe is what holds you upright in the thriller breakdown. And you thank him, and you walk out, and you do the choreography again. There is tiger balm everywhere. The smell of it lives in the air, wintergreen and camphor, mixing with the rosin and the fluorescent heat, and you will smell it for the rest of your life, and immediately remember your 20s. Costume fittings happen in a side room. If you are on Blonde Ambition, Marlene Stewart is pinning cone bra corsets onto your ribcage, designs she is developing alongside Jean-Paul Gaultier, and you are learning to breathe shallowly, because there is no other kind of breath available in a cone bra corset. If you are on the bad tour, Michael Bush and Dennis Tompkins are assembling those sergeant jackets with the epaulets and the studded belts, measuring the length of your arms down to the quarter inch. If you are on a share tour, Bob Mackie himself may be in the room, and he will be funny and kind, and exactly as you hoped he would be. The fittings are strangely intimate. Someone you have never met is touching your hips and muttering around pins in her mouth, and you are learning that your body is also a canvas, and the costume is also a character. And then, slowly, the social shape of the company starts to form. Flirtations, rivalries, alliances. You notice which dancer always gets the front and center spot, and you try not to resent her because she is also nice and she is also working hard. And anyway, resentment is a luxury that costs energy you need for the show. You notice who got demoted to the back riser between Tuesday and Wednesday for reasons no one explains. You notice that Madonna, famously, has fired and rehired dancers in the rehearsal room itself, sometimes twice in the same week, because she wants what she wants, and she is not going to pretend otherwise. You do not want to be the person fired, so you work harder. You also work harder because you have fallen a little bit in love with the 8 to 12 other people in this room. Not romantically, or not only romantically, but in the deep, strange way that happens when you sweat next to people for 14 hours a day for a month. You are becoming a family. By opening night, you will be a family. By the end of the tour, you will be something closer than family, and also something that will dissolve the minute the last bow happens, which is a contradiction you cannot yet understand. In the breaks, someone always has a boombox. Shannon's Let the Music Play blasting from the corner. Cameo. Loose ends. The OJs. Somebody is dancing in their own little improvised solo while they eat an apple. Somebody else is curled up on the floor with a Walkman pressed against their ear, eyes closed, mentally running the choreography one more time. There is a specific squeak that jazz sneakers make on Marley floor, and you will hear it in your dreams. And then, in the last week of rehearsals, there is a moment. You do not know it is coming. You are in the middle of a run-through, counting out loud, sweating through your third leotard of the day, and the metal door of the soundstage opens and everyone stops because the air in the room changes. The star has arrived. Michael, or Madonna, or Janet, or Prince, or Tina. They have been rehearsing privately with their vocal coach or their personal choreographer, or alone in a mirrored room with nobody watching. They have been preparing their own piece of this. Now they are here to put their piece inside yours. They walk to the center of the floor. They smile, or they do not. They say hello, or they do not. The rehearsal director calls the top of the number. The music starts. And for the first time, you are dancing behind someone whose face is about to be on the side of 1,000 buses. The room goes quiet in a way that is hard to describe. It is not silence, because the music is playing. It is reverence. It is the electric hush that tells you the thing you have been building for a month is about to become real. And you stand on your mark. And you wait for count one. And you think, somehow, against all odds, I made it here. And then, somehow, 3 weeks later, that moment in the rehearsal room feels like a scene from a film you saw on an airplane, because you are no longer in a studio in Burbank. You are in a coffin-shaped bunk, 3 feet wide and maybe 6.5 feet long, with a curtain pulled across the opening and a small reading light clipped to the wall above your head, and the whole thing is vibrating, because underneath you, beneath 12 other bunks and 12 other sleeping bodies, a diesel engine the size of a small apartment is pushing a 45-foot silver bus down Interstate 76 somewhere between Youngstown and Pittsburgh at 3 in the morning. Welcome to the part of the tour nobody choreographs. The bus is, almost always, a Prevost Le Mirage or an MCI Model MC9, converted from a standard highway coach into a sleeper unit by a company that specializes in exactly this. The big names in the business are Hemphill Brothers Coach Company, founded in Nashville in 1980, and Florida Coach and Senators Coaches, and a handful of smaller operators who rent their vehicles out to management firms by the month. A tour bus is not cheap. A top-tier sleeper in the mid-80s rents for somewhere around $1,200 to $1,500 a day, not counting fuel, not counting the driver, not counting the tolls. And you very quickly realize that the reason you are paired in a room with another dancer at the Holiday Inn is because every dollar matters, and the star's accountant has already done the math 4 times. The layout of the bus is something you learn by heart within the first 48 hours, because you will be navigating it in the dark, half asleep, barefoot, trying not to wake anyone. At the front, there is the driver's cockpit, with the captain's chair and the co-pilot seat, and a small swinging door that separates it from the rest of the coach. Behind that is the front lounge, which is a U-shaped booth around a small formica table with a VCR and a 13-inch television bolted into the cabinetry. The VCR collection is one of the most accurate archaeological records of the 1980s you will ever encounter. Beverly Hills Cop, Ferris Bueller's Day Off, The Breakfast Club, Top Gun, Raiders of the Lost Ark, a copy of Purple Rain that somebody brought on at the start of the tour and nobody ever took off, and which, by month 3, everyone has memorized down to the drum fills. The tapes loop. They loop so hard that for the rest of your life, you will associate the opening chime of a Paramount logo with the smell of bus upholstery. Past the front lounge is the galley, a small stainless steel sink, a microwave mounted at eye level, a mini fridge stocked with bottled water and Gatorade and cans of Tab, and a jar of pickles that nobody will claim, a Mr. Coffee machine that is always on, and a drawer of plastic cutlery that rattles every time the bus hits a seam in the highway. There is usually a basket on the counter with bananas and granola bars, and a box of those little Keebler cookies shaped like elves, because someone on the production staff has decided this counts as wholesome. Then you push through another swinging door, and you are in the bunk area, which is the heart of the whole thing. 12 bunks stacked 3 high on either side of a narrow hallway you can barely turn around in. Each bunk is a small private kingdom. There is a curtain you can pull closed, a reading light, a 12-volt outlet for your Walkman charger, a small shelf for your water bottle and your book, and your cassette of Sade's Diamond Life. And in the nicer coaches, a 13-inch television with a headphone jack so you can watch Letterman without keeping anyone awake. Some dancers decorate. They tape Polaroids to the bunk wall, a picture of their dog, a picture of their boyfriend standing in front of a Christmas tree, a postcard from their mom, a small stuffed animal that they refuse to explain. And past the bunks is the back lounge, which is understood by everyone to be the domain of the dance captain, the band leader, certain band members, and whoever wins the poker game on any given night. The back lounge has a better stereo, a nicer couch, a second television, and a kind of informal political significance. If you are invited into the back lounge, you are someone. If you are not, you stay in the front, which is completely fine, because the front lounge also has a fridge, and nobody there is going to judge you. There are rules on the bus. None of them are written down. All of them are sacred. The first rule, the most important rule, the rule that is spoken aloud to you the moment you board for the first time and repeated by the road manager as if it is a commandment delivered from a mountain, is that nobody, under any circumstances, ever uses the onboard toilet for anything other than liquid. There is no number 2 on the bus. This is not a joke. This is not a suggestion. The toilet drains into a holding tank that gets emptied at truck stops, and if you violate the rule, the entire bus smells like your decision for the next 600 miles. And the bus driver, who is already working a 14-hour shift at 40 miles per hour through the Pennsylvania mountains, will find out who did it, and you will be socially ruined for the remainder of the tour. This is a rule dancers tell civilians about decades later, and the civilians refuse to believe it. And yet, every single tour bus in America in 1986 ran on this principle. Other rules. Shoes go in the shoe bin by the door. No loud music after 2 in the morning. No talking in the bunks after the curtains are drawn. If you want to bring someone back to the bus after a show, that is a conversation you have with the tour manager first. If somebody is asleep in their bunk, you do not open their curtain for any reason short of fire. The bus is a rolling apartment building where the walls are made of fabric, and the only thing keeping 12 exhausted people from losing their minds is a shared agreement that everybody gets to be invisible when they need to be. A typical overnight run goes like this. The show ends at 10:30. You bow, you hug, you sprint to the dressing room, you peel off your costume, you shower in the cinderblock backstage shower with water that is either scalding or freezing and never in between. You throw on sweatpants and a hoodie, you grab your bag, you jog to the bus parked behind the loading dock. It is 11:15. The bus is already running. The driver, who has been napping in the captain's chair for 4 hours, greets you by your first name and tells you there is fresh coffee. You climb up the 3 metal steps. Somebody has ordered a deli tray and laid it on the table in the front lounge. Turkey, ham, Swiss, provolone, a loaf of rye, a bowl of potato salad that has been in the mini fridge since this morning and is now questionable. You make a sandwich. You crack a cold beer or a Gatorade if you are being a responsible adult, and you collapse into the booth with 3 other dancers, and for 20 minutes you do nothing but breathe. You are soaked in post-show adrenaline. Your ears are still ringing from 18,000 people. Your mascara is still smudged because you did not fully wash your face. Your ankles hurt. Your back hurts. Your soul is oddly intact. Somebody turns on Letterman on a VHS taped off NBC last night. You watch Dave do a top 10 list. You laugh at things that are only a little funny because you are too tired to judge whether they are actually funny or not. At 1:30 in the morning, the bus pulls out of the arena parking lot and onto the highway, and somebody says, with a kind of ritual weariness, "Next stop, Pittsburgh." By 2 in the morning, you are in your bunk. Curtain pulled, reading light on, Walkman headphones in, Luther Vandross singing Here and Now into your ears while the tires hum below you at 65 miles per hour. You lie on your back because your stomach is too full to lie on your side. You stare at the ceiling of the bunk, which is 6 inches above your face. You open the curtain a crack. You watch the highway lights strobe across the bunk ceiling, orange, then black, then orange, then black. As the bus rolls past one of those long stretches of Ohio highway where the overhead lamps go on for miles. And somehow, in the impossibly narrow space, with 11 other people sleeping within arm's reach, with a diesel engine rumbling beneath your spine, you fall asleep. You fall asleep the way you will never fall asleep again. Deep, dreamless, rocked by the road. The bus driver is always someone with a story. His name is Bobby, or Big Jim, or Ray, and he is in his late 50s, and he has a grey moustache and a coffee thermos the size of a forearm. And if you ask him who he has driven for, he will tell you, very casually, that he drove for Waylon Jennings in 1976, and for the Allman Brothers before that, and for Fleetwood Mac on the Rumours tour. And he will tell you about the time Stevie Nicks gave him a scarf, and you will believe every word, because bus drivers of this era genuinely did live through all of that. He drives from 11:30 at night to 7 in the morning, pulls into the next city's arena parking lot, parks the bus, closes the blackout curtains and sleeps in a small cabin behind the driver's seat while the dancers stumble out and into the Marriott. Life on the bus has its own specific culture. There are prank wars because when you confine 12 people in a rolling box for 4 months, pranks are inevitable. Shaving cream gets piped into jazz shoes. Somebody's pillow gets replaced with a frozen package of chicken breasts. Somebody's toothbrush goes missing and is found 3 weeks later taped to the ceiling of the back lounge. There is a shared copy of Rolling Stone that gets passed around until it falls apart, and a shared copy of People magazine that gets read more carefully than anyone will admit. There are mixtapes that dancers make for each other on the bus, labelled in Sharpie with titles like Ohio Turnpike Sadness or 3 a.m. Feelings. There is a Polaroid of the whole company taped to the wall above the microwave, and by month 5, there are 60 more Polaroids around it. And then there is the motion sickness, the Alleghenies in winter, the Rockies in any season, the endless switchbacks of Colorado and West Virginia, to where the bus leans into the curves and the liquid in your stomach leans with it. You learn to sleep through it. You learn to keep ginger candies in your bunk. You learn, somehow, to make peace with the fact that you are never fully still for 4 months of your life. Arrivals are disorienting. You wake up at 7:30 in the morning because the bus engine has stopped. You open your curtain. You smell coffee from the galley. You stumble out in sweatpants and yesterday's hoodie, hair in a mess, and the road manager is already standing at the front of the bus holding a stack of room keys, calling out names in alphabetical order. You grab yours. You walk the 40 feet from the bus to the hotel lobby, barefoot if you are that kind of dancer, in flip-flops if you are slightly more functional, and for one brief second, as the sliding glass doors of the Holiday Inn open in front of you and the lobby air conditioning hits your face, you genuinely do not remember which city you are in. You look up at the front desk. A banner says, "Welcome to Buffalo." You nod. You did not know you were in Buffalo. You did not know the bus had crossed a state line. Your body was in Cleveland last night and is in Buffalo this morning, and the 8 hours between those two facts are a blank tape, the kind of sleep no human being gets anywhere except on a tour bus at 3 in the morning with the highway lights strobing across the ceiling. You take your key. You find your room. You collapse onto the double bed in your clothes, and you sleep for another 4 hours because the show does not start until 8 tonight, and the whole ridiculous cycle is about to begin again. And then, somewhere around noon, or 1 in the afternoon, or whenever your body decides it has had enough of the hotel bedspread, you wake up again, and the cycle you were about to begin is not a bus cycle. It is a show cycle. It is the other half of your life. By 2 in the afternoon, you are back at the arena, Madison Square Garden, if you are lucky, the Forum in Inglewood, if you are home, Reunion Arena in Dallas, if it is a Tuesday in June and you have stopped trying to remember what city you are in. The venue is already alive. It has been alive since 6 in the morning, when the riggers arrived in their black T-shirts and their climbing harnesses and began flying the truss from the ceiling. By the time you arrive, the stage has been built, the floor has been laid. The Vari lights, which debuted at Showco's Dallas warehouse in 1981 and rolled out on the Genesis ABBA-Cab tour that same year, are hanging from the grid in neat motorized rows, waiting to be focused. The lighting designer, somebody like Peter Morse or Alan Branton, is up in front of house behind a board the size of a kitchen table, muttering into a headset about Q74. The sound check is happening. The band is up on stage in sweatpants, running the opener at half volume. And the air in the arena smells like the air of every arena before a show, which is a particular smell that nobody who has lived in it ever forgets. Rubber cables, sawdust from the rigging, coffee from the catering tent, the faint chemical sweetness of fog machine glycol already lingering in the fly space from yesterday. You sign in with the stage manager at the backstage door. The stage manager is a legend. They are always a legend. Chris Lamb, Chuck Morris, a woman named Patty who has been running rock tours since 1973 and is the only person on the tour the star is actually afraid of. The stage manager hands you a call sheet. The call sheet tells you when company class is, when sound check is, when you need to be in costume, when the doors open, when the house lights go down, and when, exactly, your first cue hits. You grab a bottle of water from the cooler. You find your dressing room. The dressing room is never glamorous. The dressing room is a converted locker room or a concrete closet behind the stage. Or if you are in Europe, a room that doubles as a broom closet between shows. There are folding chairs. There is a long table with a mirror running above it. And if you are in a good venue, the mirror has bulbs around it like in the movies. If you're in a bad venue, the mirror is the back of a compact somebody brought from home. Your costumes are hanging on a rolling rack in the corner, already steamed and laid out by a wardrobe assistant whose name you know and whose labor you genuinely cannot imagine doing yourself. There is a name tag on each rack. Yours is there. Next to it, your jazz shoes, fresh from a quick rosin dip. Next to that, your tights, folded. Next to that, the costume itself, which, depending on which tour you are on, is either a conical bra and pinstriped suit waiting to be wrestled into, or a red and black leather jacket with so many zippers you have memorized the order in which they close. Door a Rhythm Nation military uniform, with a single silver earring laid on top like a tiny punctuation mark, or a Bob Mackie feathered something that requires 2 people to put on. At 4 in the afternoon, company class begins. The dance captain finds a cleared hallway or an empty backstage corner with enough floor space, drags over a few folding chairs for the bar, and calls everyone in. You warm up. Plies, tendus, degages, all the basic ballet vocabulary you learned when you were 9 years old and still do, every single day, because your knees will stop working if you don't. Center floor, a few jumps, a few combinations. Then the captain walks everyone through the tricky sections. The transition in the middle of the 3rd number, where Lisa has to cross all the way from stage right to stage left in 12 counts. And you, stage left, you have to get out of her way without breaking formation. The lift in the 5th number that went wrong in Cleveland because Jeff hurt his shoulder. You run it. You run it again. You adjust. Then you get into the actual stage for a light spacing. The Marley floor has been rolled and taped down by the deck crew. The spike tape marks your positions in the opener in fluorescent pink. You walk it slowly, with the lighting designer up in front of house calling down cues, making sure the spots find you, making sure you are not standing somewhere that will suddenly go dark. You look out into the empty arena. 18,000 blue seats stretching up into the darkness. You try to imagine them full. You cannot, really. You never can. At 6 in the evening, you go back to the dressing room and you begin the slow, almost ritualistic transformation from a tired human in sweatpants into a creature of the stage. Makeup first. You sit down at the mirror under unforgiving fluorescent lights, and you start painting. Not subtle, not daytime. The stage is 50 yards from the front row and 200 feet from the cheap seats, and your face has to read from all of it. Foundation 2 shades too dark. Contour under the cheekbones. A line of black liner from the inner corner of the eye all the way out past the tail. False lashes. Sometimes 2 pairs stacked. Brows drawn in hard. A red or a magenta or a coral lip, depending on the tour. Someone passes around a can of Aquanet. Someone else is working a curling iron. The smell of burning hair and Aquanet and hot metal and hairspray propellant fills the room, and you breathe it in like perfume. Thus, because this smell is the smell of showtime, and your nervous system has learned to release adrenaline the moment it hits your nose. Your hair is teased. Your hair is pinned. Your hair is lacquered into a structure that will survive the next 3 hours of violent choreography and 1 encore and a sweat-soaked bow. Then the costume. The dresser, who is a full-time wardrobe person on the tour, helps you into it. Pantyhose first. Bodysuit. Whatever layer goes underneath the main piece. Zippers. Hooks. Velcro in the places the audience will never see. If it is blonde ambition, the conical bra pieces go on and get adjusted, and the pinstriped jacket goes over the top, and the gold tooth cap goes in, and you are suddenly somebody else. If it is bad, the leather is stiff and heavy, and the zippers bite your skin if you are not careful. And the boots need to be laced tight so you don't roll an ankle on the second number. If it is Rhythm Nation, the military cap has to sit at an exact angle, and the single silver earring has to go in the correct ear, which is a detail Anthony Thomas will notice from the front of house if you get it wrong. At 7:30, the company circle forms. This is sacred. The dance captain calls everyone in, and you stand in a ring, and you hold hands, sweaty palms and all, and somebody speaks. Sometimes the star is there. Sometimes it is just the dancers and the captain. For Madonna's blonde ambition, Madonna led a prayer every single night before the show. She did. She would come into the circle in her dressing gown, or sometimes already in costume, and she would say a few words, a blessing, a request for strength, a thank you, and dancers would close their eyes and mean it. Michael did something similar on Bad, though quieter, shorter, more private. Prince had the band and the dancers form a circle at Paisley Park rehearsals, and he would say something cryptic that no one fully understood, but everyone found meaningful. Tina Turner walked her circle from person to person, looking each dancer in the eye and saying their name. These moments, which take 90 seconds at most, are the spiritual architecture of the entire operation. You need them. You do not know why, but you do. By 7:45, you are in the wings. The stage manager is on headset, muttering into the dark. The cue lights are on. The band is coming up through the trap door. The intro tape is queuing up somewhere in front of house. You can feel the bass in your chest before you hear it. With a deep, rolling thunder coming through the floor, because 18,000 people are out there already, screaming, chanting, stomping. The roar is a physical thing. It pushes against your sternum. You can see the glow of it from the edge of the wing, the faint blue wash of 20,000 faces lit by the stage light bouncing back. You stretch, you shake out your hands, you bounce on the balls of your feet. Your mouth is dry. Your heart is a drum. 30 seconds, says the stage manager quietly. You You find your mark in the dark. The lights cut to black. The arena explodes. The intro tape kicks in. You run in complete blackness, with 20 feet of muscle memory telling your feet exactly where to go, and you hit your spot and you breathe, and the stage manager says, "Go." And then the lights come up, and the world becomes unmeasurable. The first hit of full arena lighting on your face at the top of an opener is a sensation that no one who has felt it ever quite describes to outsiders accurately. It is heat. It is sound. It is 18,000 simultaneous gasps. It is the temperature of the front row, which is always 10 degrees hotter than everywhere else because of the spotlights. It is the smell of the fog that has been pumped from the pit, sweet and thick, settling around your ankles. It is the faces of the front row, and you are not supposed to make eye contact, but sometimes you do, for 1/5 of a second, and you see a girl with tears already streaming down her cheeks because her idol is about to walk out 10 feet behind you, and you smile, because how can you not? Then the show. 2 hours of pure incandescent effort. Your body does things you did not know it could do. Your lungs keep up. Your knees obey. The sweat pours down your back under the spandex, rivers of it, pooling in the small of your back, soaking through the costume, turning the inside of the leather black. Mid-show quick changes happen in pitch-black corridors 4 feet wide, where a dresser you cannot see is ripping off your pants and shoving a new pair up your legs while you pull off one top and put on another, 45 seconds from the last beat of one song to the first beat of the next. You taste blood because you bit your lip during the Thriller breakdown. You taste the salt of your own sweat when you lick your mouth dry. Your ears are singing. Your eyes sting from the eyeliner running into them. And somewhere in the middle of it, during some number you could do in your sleep, you look out at 18,000 people, and you remember with a jolt of something close to disbelief that you are 23 years old, and this is your job. Then the final bow. The star is at center. The band is behind. You are on the riser, arms raised, chest heaving, and the roar comes at you like weather. You bow. You bow again. You wave. The star turns and points to the dancers, and for one glorious second, 18,000 people are looking at you, and you get to exist in their eyes, and then the star turns back, and the attention snaps forward, and it is over. Backstage, post-show, the hallway is chaos. A towel lands on your shoulders from a PA you don't know. Somebody puts a Gatorade in your hand. The star disappears through a curtain flanked by 3 security guards, and the gold braid sleeves of their jackets vanish into a dressing room you will never enter. You stand in the hallway in full makeup, panting, sweating, alive, and you remember your own name, slowly. You walk toward your dressing room. The clock on the wall says 10:35. The bus leaves at 11:15, and the whole beautiful, exhausting cycle begins, again, to turn. By 7 the next morning, or 8, or sometimes 9, depending on the distance between cities and the mood of the driver, and how many construction detours ate into the run, the bus hisses to a stop behind another arena, or in the porte-cochere of another chain hotel, and you wake up with your cheek pressed to the little shelf by your bunk window, and you do not, for several long seconds, remember which state you are in. You peel yourself out of the coffin. You step into the front lounge barefoot. The tour manager is already up, already on the payphone at the front counter, if the bus is parked at a hotel, already holding a clipboard and a fan of little paper envelopes. Each envelope has a dancer's name scrawled on it in Sharpie. Inside each envelope is a metal key on a plastic fob, or, by 1986 or so on the more modern tours, a flat magnetic card in a paper sleeve, because Saflock had just started rolling out the card key systems, and the hotels that had upgraded felt very futuristic about it. Your room number is 312. You are sharing with Lisa. Lisa is still asleep in her bunk. You grab your duffel, your garment bag, and the wilted copy of Vogue you have been carrying since Atlanta, and you stumble across the lobby in sweatpants and yesterday's eyeliner. The night clerk does not look up. The night clerk has seen 1,000 of you. The room is exactly the room. You have stayed in this room 100 times in 100 cities. 2 double beds with mauve or teal floral bedspreads that smell faintly of industrial detergent and the ghost of somebody else's cigarette. A laminate desk bolted to the wall. A 19-inch Zenith television bolted to the dresser because hotels had learned the hard way that televisions walk. A little coffee maker with the foil packets of something that claims to be coffee and is mostly not. A bathroom with tiny soaps wrapped in paper, a plastic cup in another paper sleeve, and a shower curtain printed with a pattern that has no name in any human language. You drop your duffel. You sit on the edge of the bed. You fall backward onto the bedspread without pulling it back, because you do not yet have the energy to be a person who respects linens. And you sleep hard for 3 or 4 hours, the kind of sleep that is less restorative than it is mandatory, your body cashing an overdraft it has been writing checks against for weeks. When you wake, it is noon, and you are genuinely bone-deep hungry. This is when the hotel day begins. And the hotel day, not the show, not the bus, not even the arena, is where the real, unremarked life of a 1980s tour dancer actually happens. You call the front desk and ask what city you are in. The clerk is not surprised. They tell you Tulsa, or Greensboro, or Rochester, or Omaha, because most of the tour plays secondary markets. Because the big markets only get 3 or 4 nights, and the arenas in between have to fill. You thank them, and you hang up, and you stare at the phone for a minute, because that phone is going to be the most important object in your life today. There are no cell phones. There is no email. There is no texting. There is no Instagram, no Facebook, no way to check in with a photo and a tag. The phone bolted to the laminate desk is the only thread back to everyone you love. And that phone is expensive. Hotel long-distance rates in the mid-1980s ran somewhere between $1 and $2 a minute, which in today's money is genuinely absurd, and every dancer learned quickly to avoid the in-room phone for any call longer than a few sentences. You used it to tell your mother you had landed safely. You used it to call your agent. You did not use it to actually talk. For real conversations, you used the lobby payphone. You carried a soft purse full of quarters. You stood in a little glass booth off to the side of the front desk, feeding coin after coin into the slot, hearing the bright little bing of the tone each time a quarter dropped, while the automated operator asked you to deposit another $1.25 for the next 3 minutes. And you would hear your mother in Ohio, or your father in Jersey, or your boyfriend in West Hollywood, and you had 4 minutes, maybe 5, to hold a whole relationship together. By the middle of the decade, MCI and Sprint had started selling calling cards with long strings of digits you had to punch in before the actual phone number, and those helped a little. A few dancers sprang for the AT&T card. Later in the decade, The 1-800 collect numbers you would soon hear advertised constantly on late-night television became a lifeline, because you could call Home Collect and let your mother absorb the charge on her home line, which was still expensive, but at least did not require $4 in quarters. You wrote letters, you wrote postcards. Every city had a gift shop with a rack of postcards, and you bought 3 or 4 in every stop, and you sent one home to your mother, one to your best friend, one to a grandmother who still kept everything you ever mailed her in a shoebox under her bed. Those postcards became, without anyone meaning them to, the only real chronology of the tour. Years later, when you wanted to remember where you were in October of '87, you went to your mother's house and pulled them out of the shoebox and reassembled the route from the postmarks. Every dancer carried a tour itinerary book. This was a small spiral-bound brochure printed on cheap paper, produced by the tour manager before the tour started and updated with a photocopied amendment any time something changed. Inside it were the dates, the venues, the load-in times, the hotel names, the hotel addresses, and, crucially, the front desk phone number for every hotel on the route. That last column existed because it was how your family found you. Your mother would call the Holiday Inn in Jacksonville at 6 in the evening and ask the operator to ring the room registered under your name, and if you happened to be in the room, you heard her voice, and if you were not, she left a message. And you called her back collect 3 hours later. The homesickness was chemical. The first tour was a drug. You were 22, 23, 24 years old. You were getting paid to do the thing you had dreamed about since you were a child, and for the first 2 months, you were so high on your own life that you could not imagine being sad. But somewhere around month 4, the weight arrived. You missed your dog. You missed the way the light came through your kitchen window. You missed your boyfriend, or your mother's lasagna, or the particular brand of cereal you could not find in the Omaha Piggly Wiggly. You missed being known without having to explain yourself. You spent your 24th birthday in a Marriott in Indianapolis, and the cast threw you a little cake they bought at a supermarket, and it was genuinely lovely, and you still cried in the shower afterward. Dancers coped. Some kept journals, long, messy, spiral-bound journals, full of sketches and set lists and overheard conversations and phone numbers of people they met in hotel bars. Some drank. The hotel bar was its own small kingdom on every tour, a dim carpeted lounge with a piano and a television showing SportsCenter, where dancers and crew and the occasional local promoter gathered after the show and told the same stories about Cleveland until 2 in the morning. Some dancers fell into bed with each other because 8 to 12 people spending 14 months together in hotel rooms will quietly, predictably, inexorably find each other. Dancer-on-dancer romances were common, sometimes tender, sometimes disastrous, always complicated, nor because you could not break up cleanly when you still had to be in formation together every night. There were flings with crew members, with the lighting tech who always brought you a coffee, with the drummer who smiled at you during the bridge of the ballad. There was the occasional wildly inappropriate attention from a local promoter in a silk shirt who thought his backstage pass entitled him to something it did not, and you learned to spot those men across a room and root yourself away from them with practiced ease. Daytime life in hotel cities had a texture all its own. You went to the mall. You actually did. American 1980s shopping malls were the default social space of the country, and they existed in exactly the same configuration in every suburb on the tour route, and you wandered them with your one-day-off friend, and you ate at the Orange Julius, and you tried on a sweater at the Limited, and you bought a cassette at the Sam Goody, because every mall had a Sam Goody, and most of them also had a Tower Records nearby if you were in a bigger city. And Tower Records was a holy place. You flipped through the vinyl. You picked up a 12-inch remix of something new. You stood at the listening station with giant padded headphones and heard the latest Janet track before anyone you knew had heard it. Hotel lobbies had arcades in the mid-80s, and you fed quarters into Gallagher or Pac-Man, or, if you were lucky, a Tempest machine. And you discovered that your dance-trained reflexes made you weirdly excellent at these games. You played Miss Pac-Man for 45 minutes while waiting for the bus, and you set a high score, and you signed it with your initials. And somewhere there is a machine in a Midwest hotel lobby from 1987 that still has those initials on it. Probably. On rare, genuine days off, when the tour had a travel gap, you slept until 2 in the afternoon. And then you found a real restaurant with real food, and you ate a steak or a plate of pasta or a giant American breakfast at 4 in the afternoon, like a person reclaiming her basic humanity. And then you went to a movie. You saw Top Gun in a mall theater in 1986, and you did not understand why everyone was crying, but you cried anyway. You saw Dirty Dancing in 1987, and you sat there, a professional dancer on a pop tour watching a movie about dancing, and you felt deeply, ridiculously exposed. You saw Pretty Woman in 1990, and you rolled your eyes at it for 20 years afterward. Laundry was its own subplot. The tour manager arranged bulk wash and fold services with local laundromats in every city, and you put your dirty clothes in a mesh bag with your name on a tag, and 3 days later your clothes came back folded in a stack, smelling aggressively of somebody else's detergent. If the service was not available, you took your quarters down to the hotel guest laundry at 2 in the morning, and you sat in a plastic chair under fluorescent lights reading a paperback while your unitard spun. And you understood quietly that this was the glamour of show business. The stars did not do this. The stars were in suites. Madonna, for all her intensity, was generous with her blonde ambition dancers in her own way. She kept them close. She organized group dinners at restaurants in every city. She insisted the company eat together. She treated them like a small family she had adopted, which was often warm and occasionally suffocating, and extensively documented later in Truth or Dare. Michael Jackson was different. Michael was remote. Michael ate alone, traveled separately, existed in a parallel hotel universe guarded by security and private elevators. And when dancers saw him at the venue, he was kind, almost tenderly so. But the hotel hours belonged to him alone. Prince held his after-hours world at Paisley Park when he was home, and at private clubs when he was on the road, and he invited his dancers into it often enough that they never felt abandoned. But you were always aware of being a guest in Prince's nocturnal kingdom, not a resident. And at the end of the hotel day, around 11 at night, after the show, after the towel, after the Gatorade, after the bus ride back, or after the rare off night of actual stillness, you would sit on the edge of the bed in your mauve and teal room in a Holiday Inn in Tulsa, and you would pick up the phone one more time, and you would dial your mother's number, and you would hear the long-distance static crackle down the line from 1980 whatever, and your mother would pick up on the third ring, and she would say your name like a small prayer, and she would tell you, with genuine wonder in her voice, that she had seen you on MTV for 3 whole seconds during the world premiere of the new video, and she had taped it, and she had played it back 6 times, and she was so proud, and she loved you, and it was late, and you should get some sleep, and you would hang up the phone, and you would sit there in the dark for a long minute, listening to the ice machine down the hall, and you would feel for the first time all day entirely, specifically, irreducibly yourself. And then, because the mind wanders when it is tired, you would think about the person at the center of this whole strange ecosystem, the one whose name was on the tickets, the one whose face was on the poster hanging in the lobby of the hotel you were currently staying in. You would think about the star and about the particular, peculiar, impossible-to-describe relationship a backup dancer has with a star, because the star is not your boss exactly, and not your friend exactly, and not your family exactly, but some strange fourth thing that the English language does not really have a word for. Let us talk about Madonna first, because Madonna is, by every available account, the most documented pop star of the decade when it comes to how she treated her dancers, thanks almost entirely to a single documentary released in 1991 called Truth or Dare, which followed her Blonde Ambition tour and gave the world its first real window into the backstage life of a pop dancer. If you worked for Madonna in the mid to late 80s, on the Who's That Girl tour in 1987, or on Blonde Ambition in 1990, you would describe your boss, almost universally, as intense. She was maternal and controlling in roughly equal measure, like a combination that produced the kind of devotion and the kind of resentment that only families can really generate. She called her dancers into her dressing room to gossip about their love lives. She asked about your boyfriend, your ex, the waiter you had flirted with in Milan. She hosted the group dinners already mentioned, with a genuine insistence that the company eat together. And she enforced a kind of English-only rule around her, so she would not feel excluded from conversations between her Spanish-speaking dancers. She could be cutting. She could be cruel in small, glancing ways, the way charismatic older sisters can be cruel. And she could also, without warning, hand you a Hermes scarf or $100 bill or an unsolicited piece of career advice that would quietly change your life. The Blonde Ambition cast, most of whom were in their early 20s, became Madonna's constructed family for most of 1990. Luis Camacho and Jose Gutierrez, scouted from the House of Stravaganza at the Sound Factory in New York, taught her to vogue and became, in many ways, the emotional core of the company. Carlton Wilborn, Salim Gavulus, known as Slam, Kevin Steer, Oliver Crooms, and Gabriel Trupan filled out the rest of the ensemble, and every one of them later described the tour as the most intense relationship of their young lives. It was also complicated. Gabriel Trupan, who was filmed being kissed by Madonna during a game of Truth or Dare without his full consent to being publicly outed, later sued the production and settled in 1992. And he passed away from AIDS complications in 1995, a quiet loss that the pop culture conversation has only recently begun to reckon with. Working for Madonna was not simple. Working for Madonna was, however, unforgettable. And if you had done it, you carried it the rest of your life. Michael Jackson was a completely different planet. If Madonna was a controlling older sister, Michael was something closer to a gentle, unreachable older cousin who lived in a castle. Dancers who worked the Victory Tour in 1984, the Bad Tour from 1987 through 1989, and the Dangerous Tour in 1992 and 1993 all describe him using variations of the same words: remote, reverent, childlike, generous, exacting. He would rehearse until 3 in the morning without complaint, and running the same 8 count over and over until the bodies in front of him moved as a single organism. He spoke in a whisper so soft that new dancers sometimes had to lean in close to hear him give a note, which was, of course, part of the effect. He called his dancers love or honey, all by their first names with a tenderness that felt almost ceremonial. He thanked them at the bow, personally, publicly, by name, every night. He paid them generously. And then he vanished. After the show, Michael disappeared behind a wall of security guards the size of door frames, into his private elevator, up to his private floor, into his private suite, and his hotel hours existed in a sealed universe that dancers never entered. A dancer named Lavelle Smith Jr. worked with him for years, staying with him across multiple tours, and later becoming one of his most trusted movement collaborators. Dominic Lucero, Lavelle Smith, a small core group, moved through Michael's world for a decade. They adored him. They also, privately, grieved for him, because they could see up close that the loneliest human in any arena he filled was the man whose name was on the ticket. There were the famous moments of sudden warmth, the birthday cakes arriving in dressing rooms, the gold watches gifted at the end of tours, the quiet hand on a shoulder. And there was the long, empty hallway he walked alone at the end of the night, while you rode the bus to the Holiday Inn with 11 people and a cooler full of Gatorade. Janet Jackson was, by most accounts, the easiest to love. If you danced on the Rhythm Nation 1814 tour in 1990, choreographed by Anthony Thomas, you were part of what many insiders still describe as the tightest, warmest, most genuinely collaborative company of the era. Janet trusted her dancers. She learned the choreography with them, not at them. She credited them by name. Her principal dancers, Tina Landon and Shawnette Hurd, became household names within the commercial dance industry, the kind of dancers other dancers studied tape of, and both went on to legendary careers as choreographers themselves. Janet was warm, quiet, precise, funny in small moments, and she understood in a way her brother sometimes did not seem to, that her dancers were her ensemble, not her backdrop. Working for Janet felt like being in a band. Working for Michael felt like being in a cathedral. The difference mattered. Prince was mercurial. Prince was nocturnal. Prince was also, paradoxically, one of the most loyal employers in the entire industry, provided you could live on his schedule and play by his rules. If you danced for Prince across the Purple Rain Tour in 1984 and 85, the Parade and Hit and Run Run in 1986, the Sign of the Times Tour in 1987, or the Love Sexy Tour in 1988, you had signed up for a life that operated roughly backward from the rest of the world. Rehearsals were held at 1 in the morning. At Paisley Park, which opened in 1987 in Chanhassen, Minnesota, on the outskirts of Minneapolis, the lights stayed on all night, and the Purple owner worked whenever the muse arrived, which was, generally, whenever everyone else was trying to sleep. Prince fined dancers for cursing. He fined them for being late. He fined them for showing up in the wrong color. And then, after a show, he would throw a post-show funk party at 2 in the morning that lasted until dawn, and he would hand a dancer a handwritten lyric sheet as a gift. And you would understand, looking down at his actual ink on actual paper, that you were not really being fined, you were being shaped. Prince's inner circle was an embarrassment of riches. Cat Glover, Greg Brooks, Wally Safford, Damon Dixon, and Kirky J. Thomas moved in and out of his orbit. Sheila E. and the members of the Revolution were peers and collaborators. Prince was famously protective of his dancers in public, fiercely so, and he demanded absolute loyalty in return, which most of them gave gladly, because he was also, when the lights came up at Paisley Park at 3 in the morning and the band hit a groove no one had ever heard before, the most purely musical human any of them had ever worked for. You could complain about Prince's rules. You would never complain about Prince's music. Nobody did. Tina Turner deserves her own paragraph, and then another, because she was, by all accounts, the hardest working human being on any bus anywhere in the decade. On the Private Dancer Tour in 1985 and the Break Every Rule Tour from 1987 through 1988, Tina sang for 3 hours a night in heels that would have crippled most professional athletes. And she did it after having dinner with her company, after chatting with the crew by name, after remembering the name of the new lighting tech's wife. And she was kind to her dancers. She was generous with stage time, generous with credit, generous with the small, quiet courtesies that cost nothing and mean everything on a long tour. Her dancers, Anne Beringer and Lejeune Richardson, became long-term members of her family of performers, staying with her across tours the way a good horn section stays with a band leader. Tina expected absolute professionalism, and she had earned through her own unspeakable life the right to demand it. Nobody complained. You simply tried to keep up, and when you could not, she slowed down a little, just enough to pull you along, because she had been the newcomer once too. There were others. David Bowie ran the Glass Spider Tour in 1987 with Tony Basil as choreographer and a young Constance Marie as the featured dancer. And Bowie, the eccentric and generous in equal measure, treated his dancers like actors in a living theatre piece, which they essentially were. Whitney Houston toured the hits with simpler dance elements, mostly gesture and runway, and her dancers described her as sweet, private, unfailingly polite. Paula Abdul is her own entire story. She rose from being a Laker girl from 1984 through 1987, was plucked by Janet Jackson to choreograph the Control and Rhythm Nation videos, and then detonated into her own stardom with Forever Your Girl in 1988, crossing the threshold from dancer to headliner in a way almost nobody else of the decade managed. Every dancer watched Paula's trajectory with a mix of admiration and calculation, because her career was proof that the invisible floor of the industry was, occasionally, penetrable. Every star imposed a hierarchy, whether they meant to or not. Who ate with whom? Who got upgraded to the suite? Who flew on the private jet when the next city was too far to bus? Who rode the bus with the rest of the dancers, and who rode the second, nicer bus with the band, and who rode in the town car with the manager? These invisible architectures shaped your daily life more than you could admit. A suite upgrade for one dancer and not another could sour a dressing room for weeks. A seat on the jet offered once and not again was a small wound you did not mention. And everyone watched who the star chose to sit next to at the company dinner. The quiet moments were the ones you remembered. Michael showing up at a dancer's birthday with a cake he had personally asked the hotel kitchen to make, presented with that whispered formality, as if the cake itself were a small religious object. Madonna handing a broke young dancer a Hermes scarf she had worn in an editorial shoot, saying something offhand and cutting about the colour so the gift would not feel like charity. Prince leaving a handwritten lyric sheet on a dresser with a small purple flourish in the corner. Tina Turner remembering, 6 months into a tour, that your sister had been sick and asking after her by name. Janet hugging you after a show and saying nothing at all because she did not need to. And here is the gentle, sad, universally true thing that every dancer I am describing eventually learned, and that you would eventually learn too, and that nobody prepares you for because nobody can. Most stars forget most dancer names by the time the next tour cycles in. Not out of malice. Not out of ingratitude. Simply because the star's life is a river and your tour was a tributary, and there will be another tour next year with 12 new bodies, and the star cannot possibly hold all of them in her memory, and the ones who stay are the exceptions that prove the rule. You can spend 14 months of your life with Madonna or Michael or Prince, and then, 5 years later, you can see them at a party in Los Angeles, and they will look at you with genuine warmth and genuine blankness, and they will say something like, "Love, it is so good to see you," and you will know that they have no idea which tour, which city, which year, which name. It will not hurt the way you would expect it to hurt. By then, you will have been on the other side of it. You will have watched new dancers rotate into companies you helped build, and you will have understood, finally, that everyone in this ecosystem is a passenger on someone else's timeline. The star is not cruel. The star is tired. The star has had to absorb so many faces that the faces have become a single, soft, grateful blur. You were in the blur. You knew you were in the blur. And on the good nights, you decided you did not mind. Because somewhere, in a shoebox under your mother's bed, there was a postcard from Tulsa in your handwriting, and a taped MTV clip of 3 seconds of you in a leather jacket. And those things, small as they were, did not belong to the star. Those things belonged to you. Those things belonged to you. And so did something else, something heavier that we have not really talked about yet. Because the cake and the scarf and the lyric sheet are the parts of this story that photograph well, and there were parts of it that did not photograph at all. Let's sit with those for a little while, gently, because the dancers deserve that too. Start with the body, because the body is where the tour first tells you the truth. By the end of a 120 show run, your body was not the same instrument you had walked onto the bus with. Your knees carried a low, constant inflammation, the kind of ache that did not spike during a show but hummed underneath everything else, like a tuning fork someone had struck in the back of your leg and never silenced. Your metatarsals, those tiny bones across the top of your foot, were prone to stress fractures that you could sometimes hear before you could feel. A small, hot click mid-combination that you then had to dance on for another 45 minutes because there was no understudy and the show did not stop for a metatarsal. Shin splints were so universal, they almost did not count as injuries. Rotator cuff strains came from the big lifts and the endless arm choreography. Plantar fasciitis crept into the soles of your feet like cold water. And hips, your hips, carried everything. The taping ritual each morning was its own small liturgy. The dance captain, or sometimes a traveling athletic trainer, would set up on a folding table in the wings at 4 in the afternoon, and dancers would line up the way congregants line up at a small country church, waiting their turn to be wrapped. ankles first, in tight figure eights of athletic tape, then arches. Then, for the unlucky ones, knees, ribs, the wrists. Tiger balm went on like cologne. Ice baths in hotel bathtubs were so common that dancers learned to tip the housekeeping staff extra because the tubs would be ringed with a strange pale film by checkout. Occasionally, a chiropractor would be flown in for a weekend, and everyone in the company would take a turn on the table, and the dance medicine community of the era, people like Dr. Lewis Harrison, and, later in the decade, doctors who would become fixtures in dance wellness circles, began to quietly understand that this particular population of athletes, these young commercial dancers who were not quite acknowledged as athletes, were grinding themselves into powder. Cortisone shots, when they were offered, were usually accepted. You were 22. The tour had 3 months left. You needed to dance. You said yes. Pain on a tour was not something you managed. Pain was something you ignored until it went away, or until the tour ended, whichever came first. Then there was the other way of ignoring pain, which we have to talk about honestly, because to skip it would be to tell half the story. The drug culture of 1980s touring was real, and it was not limited to the rock circuit. Cocaine had saturated the music industry by the mid-decade, and while the pop tours were generally cleaner than the rock tours, cocaine crossed into pop dressing rooms too, carried by managers, band members, local promoters, and sometimes dancers themselves. Some companies were entirely sober, some were not. The ones that were not rarely talked about it, because you did not need that kind of attention from a tour manager whose job was to keep the machine moving. The speed was a different story, because speed wore the costume of dietary discipline. Dexatrine was sold at every drugstore in America. Black beauties, which were really amphetamines prescribed for weight loss or narcolepsy, circulated under the counter. A dancer who needed to stay in a spandex leotard for 120 shows, and who could not reliably eat 3 meals a day on a bus, might swallow a pill that was functionally an amphetamine and call it a diet aid, because everyone else was doing the same thing, and because the pressure to stay razor thin in a music video close-up was not theoretical. It was in your contract, implicitly, and it was in the fit of your costume, literally, every single night. Alcohol was freely available and socially required. Marijuana was everywhere and largely ignored. And some dancers, bless them, unabstained entirely, drank water, went to bed at midnight, lifted weights in hotel gyms, and got out of the decade with their bodies and chemistries intact. Those dancers are still teaching today. They are the reason the institutional memory of the era survives at all. Eating disorders were the quiet plague of the commercial dance world, and nobody called them that in 1985. The Scarsdale diet circulated in photocopied pages. The grapefruit diet had a revival every spring. Tab, that slim pink can of chemical sweetness, was sometimes a meal. Laxative abuse existed and was almost never named. A generation of dancers, mostly women, but plenty of men too, learned to make peace with hunger in ways that followed them into their 30s and 40s, and sometimes did not let them go. If you are a dancer of that era listening right now, you already know. If you are not, please know that the bodies you admired on MTV were often bodies under quiet, private siege, and the people inside them were doing what they thought they had to do, because the job required it, and nobody, yet, was telling them otherwise. And then, Because we cannot tell this story honestly without telling this part, there was the other shadow, the one that fell across the entire American dance community in those years, the one that took the teachers and the choreographers and the dressing room confidants and the boyfriends and the chosen brothers, one after another, with a quiet brutality that is almost impossible to describe now that the world has mostly moved on. The AIDS crisis gutted the dance world. It is not an overstatement. It is not a generalization. The 1980s were a lost generation for American dance, particularly for gay men in the industry, and the loss was so vast and so concentrated that the field has never fully recovered. Michael Peters, the choreographer of Thriller and Beat It, the architect of moves you have seen 500 times without knowing his name, died of AIDS in 1994. He was 46. Alvin Ailey, the towering modern choreographer whose company had trained or influenced half the commercial dancers working that decade, died in 1989. The list of teachers, principals, and backup dancers lost in those years is long enough that if you read it aloud, you would still be reading when the sun came up. On a tour, in a dressing room, you learned to read silences. A dancer who disappeared for a week between legs. A phone call that left someone puffy-eyed and quiet in the corner. A friend at edge who you had not seen in a few months, whose name you stopped hearing, and then whose name you heard one more time in a way that made your stomach drop. The fundraisers multiplied. DIFFA, the Design Industries Foundation Fighting AIDS, was founded in 1984 and became a lifeline of financial and social solidarity. Broadway Cares emerged a few years later. Dancers raised money on their one night off in a city. They wore red ribbons to shows. They held each other through phone calls from hospital rooms. Gabrielle Troupin, one of Madonna's blonde ambition dancers, would be lost in 1995. Carlton Wilborn, another of her dancers, would later reveal in his memoir Front and Center, published in 2008, that he had been dancing on that tour while HIV positive, hiding the diagnosis from everyone, terrified that a disclosure would end his career. Read that sentence again, slowly. A young man in his 20s performing in front of tens of thousands of people every night, carrying a secret that, at that moment in medical history, felt very much like a sentence, and still hitting every mark, every count, every lift. The strength inside that silence is almost unbearable to sit with. And he was not alone. He was one of many. The mental health cost of all of this, the physical grind and the chemical crutches, and the disordered eating and the grief, did not usually announce itself during the tour. It waited. It pooled in the corners. It showed up in small ways, the identity confusion that crept in around the third month, when you started to wonder whether you were the person on stage in the spotlight or the person in the hotel room staring at the popcorn ceiling at 4 a.m. You were both, of course. But they felt like different people, and they were not always on speaking terms. There was also, and this too must be named gently, the long shadow of exploitation. Predatory choreographers existed. Casting directors who asked for things they had no right to ask for existed. The casting couch was not a metaphor. Young dancers, often underage or barely of age, often far from home, often desperate for the break, were sometimes pressured into things they did not want and could not easily refuse, because the industry ran on informal power, and the word no could cost you a career. And not every story was a story of abuse. Most were not. But enough were that every dancer of the era, if you ask them gently over coffee 30 years later, has at least one memory that still sits wrong in their chest. And then there was the money, which looked, on paper, like a lot. $1,200 a week in 1986 sounds like real money. And it was. Until you subtracted the 10% agent commission and the manager fees if you had a manager, and the union dues if you were AGVA, and the taxes, which were nightmarish because you earned income in 14 different states and a handful of foreign countries on a single tour, and had to file in every one of them, and the cost of keeping your apartment in Studio City or Van Nuys running while you were gone, and the fact that non-union gigs offered no health insurance, so your cortisone shot was out of pocket. Some dancers finished a one-year tour with $3,000 saved. Some finished in debt. A few finished ahead. Almost none finished rich. And then the tour ended. The psychological crash that followed a long tour is something you cannot prepare for, no matter how many times the older dancers warn you. You came home to your empty apartment in the valley, and the refrigerator hummed, and there was no bus engine underneath it, no 11 voices in the front lounge, no schedule on the wall, no costume laid out, no call time, no stage. You slept 16 hours. You woke up. There was still no call time. You slept another 12. Your phone did not ring. The silence was so loud it had a shape. Many dancers spiraled in the weeks after a tour ended. Some drank, some used, as some lay on the floor of an apartment in Van Nuys and cried for reasons they could not explain. Some called their mothers. Some called their dance captain, who was, almost certainly, doing the same thing in her own apartment on the other side of town. The ones who built sustainable careers out of this era, the ones who became choreographers and commercial directors and teachers, and, eventually, the quiet architects of the next generation of commercial dance, were often the ones who had, by whatever grace or stubborn instinct, kept something of themselves intact through the tour. They had said no to the third line of cocaine. They had eaten the sandwich instead of skipping dinner. They had gone to the AIDS memorial and cried and kept dancing. They had insisted, stubbornly, on being a whole person in an industry that preferred you as a useful fragment. Many others left the business entirely by 1992. They went back to school. They opened small studios in suburbs. They sold real estate in Sherman Oaks. They became parents. They became happy, most of them, in the quiet way people become happy when they stop being watched. None of them, not one, were failures. The ones who left were not failures, and the ones who stayed were not heroes. They were all, every single one of them, people who had carried a decade of beauty and grief on their shoulders and lived. Which brings you, inevitably, to the end of the tour itself. The end of a tour, when you are living it, does not feel like an ending for most of its length. It feels like every other day. You wake up on the bus, you check into a hotel, or you ice your knees, you eat a bagel, you do company class, you put on the costume, you do the show, you get back on the bus. The routine is so complete that the idea of it stopping becomes slightly absurd, the way the idea of winter stopping becomes absurd if you are living inside of January. And then, somehow, you are 2 weeks out, and then 1 week, and then you are counting shows on the fingers of one hand. Let us place you for the final time on a specific date in a specific city. It is the 5th of August 1990, and you are in Nice, France, at the Parc des Sports Charles Herman. You have been on the Blonde Ambition tour since April. You have danced in Japan, in North America, in Europe. You have seen cities you would not have been able to afford to visit on your own in a lifetime, or from the narrow window of a moving bus. And tonight is the last show. Or let us place you instead on the 27th of January 1989 at the Los Angeles Memorial Sports Arena for the final night of the Bad Tour, a tour that has been crawling around the planet for more than a year. Either one. The feeling is the same. The day of the last show has a particular texture. You wake up earlier than you need to. You eat breakfast slowly. You notice things you have stopped noticing: the color of the hotel bedspread, the weight of the coffee mug, the shape of your tour jacket thrown over the chair. In the morning, the crew starts signing each other. Sharpies come out. Black ink scrawls across satin and leather, inside jokes and phone numbers, and initials inside hearts, and, sometimes, simple messages of love. Your tour jacket, or by the end of the day, will look like a high school yearbook. You will keep it in a closet for the next 30 years and take it out once a decade and cry. The gifts appear at load-in or at the company meeting. Michael Jackson famously gave his dancers gold watches, engraved on the back with the tour name and the year. Madonna gave out personalized satin jackets with each dancer's name stitched above the heart. Prince, who communicated in small and deliberate gestures, sometimes handed out handwritten thank you notes, or a single lyric sheet from a song that had become personal during the run, folded and slid quietly into your palm. Tina Turner, by every account, cooked for her crew. That is not a metaphor. She sometimes cooked. The stars were, in these small gestures, trying to say the thing they had not had time to say for the last year, which was, thank you, and I saw you, and I know what you gave me. The last show itself is a strange animal. It is, in one sense, just another show. You hit your marks. You do the lifts. You run the Vogue section, or the Thriller zombie breakdown, or the Rhythm Nation military counts, with the same muscle memory that has carried you through the previous 119 nights. But there is a second current running underneath it, a slow heat of grief and gratitude and disbelief, and by the third number, someone in the ensemble is already crying. By the encore, most of you are. The front row is holding up signs, some of them for the star, some of them, beautifully and surprisingly, for you. Your name, written in Sharpie on cardboard, are held up by a French teenager who has been waiting at the stage door since 10 in the morning. It is the first and possibly the last time in your life that a stranger will hold up a sign with your name on it. You will remember it in detail when you are 70. The encore runs long. It always does. Someone extends a solo. Someone holds a note. The star, who has been controlled and professional for 14 months, lets the seams show for a moment, and then goes back into the wings, and the house lights come up, and the 18,000 people on the floor begin to spill out into the nice evening, or the Los Angeles night, and the thing that you have been living inside of for a year is, suddenly and without ceremony, over. The wrap party is held at a rented club or a warehouse, or, if budgets are generous, at a hotel ballroom taken over for the occasion. Champagne is poured. The band, who have been polite strangers all year from the other bus, finally mingle with the dancers. The riggers and the truck drivers and the wardrobe assistants, the invisible infrastructure of the entire enterprise, show up in regular clothes, and you realize you have never seen some of them out of their black show blacks. The star may come for an hour. The star may not. Madonna, by most accounts, came and stayed longer than people expected. Michael Jackson slipped in, said a few quiet words, and slipped out. Prince, depending on the tour, either threw the wildest after-party in the city or vanished entirely to a recording studio he had commandeered nearby. You dance with people you have not quite danced with yet, in any full and unguarded way, and someone puts on the song that will always, for the rest of your life, mean this tour and no other tour. And you sing along with 11 people who have become, in a way the outside world will never quite understand, your family. And then the next morning happens. That is the cruel part. You wake up in the hotel, you pack your duffel, the same duffel you packed in Burbank 14 months ago, and you realize that your life for the last year has fit, more or less, inside a bag you can carry on one shoulder. You go downstairs. You find the breakfast buffet. 6 of your 11 family members are there, red-eyed, quiet, pretending to read USA Today. Someone says, "What time is your flight?" Someone else says, 3. Someone else says, "I booked mine for 9. I needed to just go." You hug at the front of the hotel. You exchange phone numbers on napkins, knowing that most of you will lose the napkins before you get home. 4 hours later, you are in an airplane seat next to a stranger who is eating pretzels, and you do not know what to do with your hands. You land in Los Angeles. You take a cab to your 1-bedroom in Studio City, or Van Nuys, or North Hollywood, or, if you have been saving, West Hollywood. The apartment smells like a place that has not been opened in a year. You drop the duffel. You stand in the middle of the living room. You do not quite know what to do next. So you sleep. You sleep for 16 hours. You wake up briefly, eat a piece of bread, and sleep another 12. The phone eventually starts ringing again. It always does. Your agent calls about a commercial audition. Your friend calls about a music video. A guy you met in Barcelona calls about a workshop. You go to the audition. You do not get it. You go to another one. You get it. You are working again. The wheel keeps turning. And here is where the careers begin to diverge, quietly, over the next year or two, and then the next decade, into the long and varied afterlives of the commercial dancers of the 1980s. Some of them became the architects of everything that came after. Vincent Pattison, who had choreographed the Bad Tour and the Smooth Criminal video, went on to direct commercials and films, to choreograph the Madonna Girly Show, and eventually, in 2000, to choreograph Björk's performances for Dancer in the Dark, a project so formally strange and emotionally severe that most commercial choreographers would not have touched it. He touched it. Lavelle Smith Jr., who had danced with Michael Jackson for years and stayed close to him across multiple tours, became a choreographer in his own right and won an Emmy for his work. Tina Landon, who came up through the Janet Jackson ensemble, became one of the most sought-after choreographers of the 1990s and 2000s, shaping the stage language of Christina Aguilera and Jennifer Lopez and a dozen others. Luis Camacho and Jose Gutierrez, who had been scouted out of the House of Extravaganza and thrown onto the Blonde Ambition stage to teach the world voguing, carried that legacy forward into decades of performance and teaching and cultural preservation, until Jose passed in 2023, mourned by an entire community that remembered exactly who had walked into that room with him at the Sound Factory. Others became teachers. They opened studios, or took residencies at Edge Performing Arts Center in Los Angeles, or at Millennium Dance Complex, which would become the next dominant training ground of the 1990s and 2000s. They stood in front of 14-year-olds from Ohio and 18-year-olds from Korea, and they taught the combinations they had done in front of 90,000 people, and the kids had no idea really who they were teaching, which was perhaps the point. Others left dance entirely. They went back to college. They became real estate agents in Sherman Oaks and actors in small television guest roles and interior designers for clients who had no idea their new kitchen was being designed by someone who had once danced the Thriller breakdown in a leather jacket in Yokohama. They became parents. They became husbands and wives. They became, in the quiet way people become these things, happy. Not everyone is meant to be on stage for a lifetime. Some people are meant to dance for a decade and then sit on a porch. And some, as we have already said, did not make it out of the decade. They are held now in a different kind of memory, the kind you keep in the private corners of your chest and light a candle for every so often when a song comes on the radio. The larger legacy, though, the one that nobody credits them for, is this. The music video era, which ran from the birth of MTV in 1981 through the slow fade of the form in the 2000s, did not just change music. It fundamentally created the modern commercial dance industry. Before MTV, a backup dancer was a variety show person, a solid gold dancer, a Vegas review dancer, a television special hire. After MTV, a backup dancer was a brand asset, a visible part of the artist's identity, a figure in their own right. The dancer as brand archetype that would define the 2000s, the Britney Spears tours, the Janet Jackson All For You era, the Lady Gaga Monster Ball, all of it, rested on a foundation that had been laid by the anonymous bodies of the 1980s. The people you have been inside of for the last 2 hours were the first wave. They invented the job. They did it in real time, without a template, while also, by the way, living their own small human lives. And you, in this imagined life we have been sharing, are one of them. You went home to your one bedroom in Studio City. You unpacked the duffel. You slept for 16 hours, and then another 12. When you woke, the phone was ringing. Your agent, an audition, a new choreographer, a new song, a new tour cycle beginning already, somewhere in Burbank, with dancers arriving in their leg warmers and their manila envelopes to do the combination one more time. You got out of bed. You put on jazz shoes. You walked out the door. The wheel kept turning, and somewhere behind you, quietly, the 1980s began to end. And if you are still with me, still breathing slow under your blanket, still half conscious in whatever dark room you have made for yourself tonight, then thank you. Thank you for staying all the way through. Thank you for letting these forgotten people ride shotgun in your head for 2 hours. Think for a moment about who you have just lived inside of. The hopeful body on the Lankershim sidewalk in the February rain, the holding a manila envelope. The sweating, stubborn ensemble member in the Burbank rehearsal room learning a count of 8 for the 200th time. The small human curled in a coffin bunk on a Prevost rolling through Pennsylvania at 3 in the morning, watching highway lights strobe across the ceiling. The costumed figure in the Madison Square Garden wings, counting 1, 2, 3, 4 under their breath before the downbeat. The quiet voice at the Holiday Inn payphone in Tulsa telling their mother they are fine. The last bow in Nice. These are not famous people. These are stubborn people. They were quietly competent, quietly exhausted, quietly brilliant, and almost entirely uncredited. Every moonwalk you have ever replayed on a screen, every cone bra frozen in a magazine, every chair dance and every pirouette at Paisley Park, every feathered kick Tina Turner launched in heels at the age of 45 rested on the bodies of people whose names the world never quite bothered to learn. They were doing their best with what they had, which was youth and knees and a duffel bag. They were not chasing immortality. They were chasing the next gig, the next per diem, the next chance to stand in a dark room and wait for a cue. That is enough. That has always been enough. Tonight, as you lie in your warm bed with your phone face down and your climate-controlled air moving gently over your shoulders, maybe spare a quiet thought for the ones who slept 3 bunks high with 11 strangers for a year and woke up in a different city every morning and still hit the mark and still smiled at the front row and still, somehow, sent a postcard home. Spare a thought for the ones who did not make it out of the decade. Spare a thought, too, for the one you became tonight in this imagined life, who is sleeping now in Studio City with the duffel still unpacked at the foot of the bed. Sleep is its own small performance, you know. A quiet show in a dark theatre for an audience of 1. You do not need to remember any of the names. You do not need to remember any of the dates. Let them wash out of you like stage makeup at the end of a long night. If the channel found you tonight and you want more of these, there will be more. The roadies of the 1970s, the silent film extras, the stagehands of Broadway in the 1950s, they will come quietly when they are ready. For now, wherever you are, in a bed in Manchester, a couch in Denver, a hotel room in Seoul, you are safe. You are held by the dark and the lights are going down. 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Sleep well.